Well, welcome to Keys of the Kingdom. I'm Brother Gregory, and again, we're going to talk about the Kingdom of God, and we're going to hit a number of different topics and try to bring them all together into one. And one of those, we've talked about it many times, religion, and we point out to the fact that religion is defined differently at different times and when you look at different sources. And as you change the definition of words, you change the way people think, because especially if they go back and read ancient texts or older texts, historical texts, and at the time something was written, religion meant one thing, and at another time it meant another. And you could do the same thing with other words like democracy. We point out in 1927, the Army Field Manual defined democracy as a really bad and wicked form of government. And this is U.S. Army Field Manual. And by 1954, the equivalent of the same field manual defined democracy as what we're fighting for. And it's a great thing. It's a wonderful thing. So which is it? Which definition are we to use? Well, if it was a bad thing in 1927, or still listed as a bad thing in 1927, because already in 1927 democracy was starting to look like a good thing. And of course we had a thing called the Democratic Party in the United States, and the Democratic Party was saying that they were democratic, although they opposed the ending of slavery. They opposed the Civil Rights Act. They opposed, a lot of things that you would think were more democratic, but yet they called themselves a Democratic Party. And but the thing is, over a period of time, these words shift about, and what that word democratic meant at a particular time. So it's very important that when you go and you want to study, a document that's 100 years old or 200 years old or 2,000 years old, that you understand the meaning of the words at the time the document was written. Not what you think that word means today, or what that word might even mean today, but what that word meant back when the original document was written. So reading things like scriptures, like the Bible, the New Testament was written, approximately 2,000 years ago, a little bit after that, and those words meant something. And one of the basic translations we have is the King James, and that was translated hundreds of years ago. There's been a lot of subsequent translations that are supposedly bringing in more modern language, but more modern language what? 200 years ago, 100 years ago, 50 years ago. So understanding the context of what the author is trying to convey to you is very important. So I read an article. I haven't read the whole article, actually. I've read bits and pieces of it. But it says, from astrology, cult politics, the many ways we try, and in parentheses, and fail, to replace religion, which is an article that appears on Quillette. And we'll talk about this article more in days to come. But it talks about this idea of trying to replace religion with a form of secularism. People say, well, belief in God is superstitious, but the belief in the Big Bang is science. Well, not really, because the Big Bang, nobody was an eyewitness. We see evidence that suggests that there might have been a singularity of cause of the universe, a Big Bang explosion and things, but they don't have any idea what banged, what exploded, how it exploded, what brought it all about. All that is based on, you're just as well off in believing in God as you are in the Big Bang, because the evidence really of what even the Big Bang was is non-existent. It takes huge leaps of faith that and then so they try to explain it away, and they create a multi-universe concept and then you're supposed to believe in the multi-universe, which nobody really has any evidence that the multi-universe exists. I mean, there are certain evidence that energy seems to pop in from nowhere, and so they guess that that's another dimension. And so they say, well, there's another dimension exists because that must be where the energy is coming from. But they don't see the other dimension. They're just guessing it. And they are guessing it with, they have certain mathematical models that they say, well, this must be so. But it's still projection. And it's still faith in their mathematics. And over the years, their mathematics is constantly changing and even contradicting, and some theories are thrown out because they find new evidence that counters that, and then they reformulate, membrane theory and string theory and all these different theories, and they all have certain problems. And if you close your mind to the problem, then you can believe in it. But if you don't close your mind to the problem, then you have to explain what the problem is. So all that is extremely complicated, and so most people think, oh, well, they're scientists. They're wearing white coats. They know what they're talking about. But a great deal of the science today is based on faith, belief, assumptions about the universe. And but you're supposed to, so the idea is that we're replacing the superstition of religion with the scientific facts. But their facts are observations and conclusions drawn from theories. And then, so there's a theory that there's a God, or at least we call a God. If somebody asks us to draw it, like the little girl who was drawing a picture, and the teacher says, what are you drawing a picture of? And they says, I'm drawing a picture of God. And the teacher says, nobody, and the little girl's drawing away. And she says, nobody knows what God looks like. And the little girl says, they will in a minute, because she thought, well, I'm drawing a picture of him. And the reality is that's, from her point of view, she's drawing a picture of God. Does he look like Charlton Heston, or George Burns, or Morgan Freeman, who have all played God in the movies? So we don't know what God looks like. And but what God is a heuristic that we use, a term we use to express some sort of divine intelligence that's behind creation. Not just a big random big bang and everything just kind of falls into place after that. I mean, the idea that takes a huge leap of faith, that everything is just, all these patterns, all these things of creation, the periodic tables, the elements and all these things create patterns and interact and create more patterns, and life comes, and life seems to be conscious and communicates with other life, walking about, and reproduces consistently for thousands of years, and supposedly reproductions from millions of years and even billions of years of life on this planet interacting, and comes up with us. But there is no God. It's just all chemical reaction. There is no free choice. We're all just a product of our environment or a product of our genetics. Well, yeah, maybe, but then what do you do with the multiverse? And are there some universes that are more powerful than others? What is heaven and hell but just other realms and dimensions? And a way of expressing what those other realms and dimensions look like. So that's just part of the multiverse. There are many mansions, Jesus says. Is that many universes? Just another way of saying it. And then, so how many are there? Is there an infinite number or not an infinite number? We don't know. It's just something we talk about, and neither do the scientists know. It's just something they talk about. Now, something exists, I think, therefore I am, but how is it all related? What is supernatural? Is there anything at all in the universe that is supernatural, above nature? Or is it simply what we call supernatural is above the nature that we see? You know, the physical universe we see with our eyes, which is a limit. We know there's all kinds of light around us that our eyes do not see. So therefore there are, and when our eyes receive light, they're only receiving a reflection off of other objects. And we see them. So you can reach out, and if you were blind, you could reach out and touch these objects and get a vision in your mind of what you're touching. So when we say supernatural, we're saying something's greater than nature, something more than nature. Well, we have to encapsulate nature into what we see, touch, feel, smell, taste, and recognize that it exists with our senses, even if we look at it through a microscope or electron microscope or whatever. But then we've encapsulated nature into what we can see, and then we say things that are above that, or more than what we can see, are supernatural. But wouldn't everything, what we see and not see, still be natural? So is there anything above that nature of existence? If that energy pops in from those other universes, is that supernatural, or is it just super the universe we see and feel and touch? So is there anything such as a miracle? You know, it all is relative to how we look at things. Something that is more than what we see, more than what we are used to seeing, more than what we have been comfortable with seeing. That becomes supernatural or miraculous or what have you. But that's perspective. That's point of view. And our perspective and point of view is dependent upon what we can see, feel, touch, and imagine to be true. But there is a truth out there. There is an existence out there. Does our thinking affect that existence? Maybe. There's a lot of evidence to prove that that is. So anyway, where are we going with all this? Like I said, I was just going to touch on that article. This happens to be, we're coming up on the new year when this show is done, but this kind of, our topic is universal, so it doesn't really matter. But there was an incident recently in a valley nearby here, and somebody else who follows the Facebook of that valley, which is a kind of a community Facebook, saw an argument developing in that valley's Facebook about Christmas. Is Christmas a pagan holiday? Well, most people don't think so. I shouldn't say most people. A lot of people don't think so. A lot of people who celebrate Christmas, they don't even think about it being a pagan holiday. They just celebrate Christmas because their parents celebrated Christmas, and maybe their grandparents celebrated Christmas, and so they celebrate Christmas. But there are a certain number of people going around today saying that Christmas is a pagan holiday. So is Christmas a pagan holiday, but brought into Christianity by pagan influences? And does it really matter? What's really going on? And this, what we're really talking about here is not Christmas or whether it's a pagan holiday, but it's that perspective, that way we look at things, and how the way we look at things frightens us. Now, you know, you can get a paranoid schizophrenic that sees something that is absolutely harmless and not a threat, but they imagine it to be a threat. They react to it as if it's a threat. They actually go up and hit it with a club in self-protection because they imagine it to be a threat. And they end up, you know, bludgeoning some old woman in the street because they thought it was a CIA agent spying on them. None of which was true, but in their mind it was true, and so they reacted to how they perceive things. And so, of course, that's an extreme case. We can say, well, that guy's crazy. He has imagined that this old woman was a threat, and he went up and hit her with a big pipe. I mean, there's actually such an incident. He was going around hitting everybody with pipes because he thought everybody was conspiring and attacking him because he was having episode, a schizophrenic episode, and delusion. But those are extreme cases, and it's easy to say, well, that guy is crazy, and that's extreme, and obviously that's not what's taking place. And of course, you have movies like Conspiracy Theory, where this guy is supposedly crazy and imagining that all these conspiracies are going on, and then it ends up, by the end of the movie, that there really was a conspiracy going on, but he also was crazy. He was a little bit nuts. But some of the things he was saying were true. There really was conspiracies going on. I always think it's funny when people talk about conspiracy theories, because if you study history, what you're often studying is a series of true conspiracy theories. Gulf of Tonkin. You say, oh, that was a conspiracy theory. But yeah, but it was true, too, because it's been proven and confessed, and they say, yeah, we were doing that. And there were all kinds of these things throughout history. My own great uncle, and I've told this story before, there was actually a London Times reporting that he was beheaded in the Tower of London as a traitor because he divulged secret information to the enemy. And so he was tried and convicted and beheaded in the Tower of London. Well, I have a picture of him holding up that newspaper that says that he was beheaded in the Tower of London in a Minneapolis parade back when he was an older man, but many years after he was supposedly beheaded. And what the story was is that he had divulged false information to spies, known spies, so that they would believe that the British were moving troops to a particular place and location at a particular time. They would move troops to intercept those troops, to stop them from landing. I think it was in South Africa or someplace. It was during the Boer Wars, I think. And in order to get the spies to be convinced that that information was true, they faked his trial and beheading in the Tower of London. So he was actually a double agent working for the Queen. And, and that's just history. It's part of my own personal heritage and history, is that it was a conspiracy of a conspiracy of a conspiracy. But when you put them all together, you find out what the real truth was. So we're going to take a little brief look at this idea, is Christianity pagan? And one of the reasons I thought about this, well, it's the season for conspiracy theories. It's always a season for conspiracy theories. But somebody wrote on the New York group and the network, everybody should be a part of the network and find out what's really going on. It's the quickest way that we can get information out to everybody. And it's also organized in the way, the Living Network, not just the email network, but the Living Network is organized in a way that Christ commanded his disciples to organize the people. Clearly, the early church was organized in this fashion long before Constantine. And so everybody should, and the reality is, if you go back to the time of Moses, they used the same pattern, and even Abraham used the same pattern, which is why Jethro knew of the pattern, which is a pattern that was used even before Nimrod and probably before Cain, believe it or not. But that's another issue altogether. But anyway, there's an article, and I was going to copy and paste some of it and in my notes so that I could go off of this article, but they have blocked copying and pasting the article. But it's on I guess it's johnsonedopoulos.com. But it's 7 men who tried to paganize the origins of Christmas but failed. So, there's lots of books. I even know some of the people who wrote some of the books saying that Christmas is a pagan holiday. And, the one individual, the name as author on the book is Israel. That's not his real name. Something Israel, I don't remember, but Israel is in his name. But none of that is his real name. I know his real name. And he lives back east. and he's divorced and a bit of a recluse and hasn't paid all his debts, and but he is absolutely convinced that all these holidays and modern Christianity, including the Protestant religions, is the result of pagan religions. And this is what the guy in the valley north of us, Christmas Valley, was saying, is that Christianity, Christmas is pagan, and anybody who's celebrating it is going to go to hell. And eventually that came out. Somebody was antagonizing him, and the whole posts were going back and forth, and the guy who was antagonizing him, I met his family, and he was just playing the devil's advocate and playing a little bit of a game. But the guy was getting all worked up about it because his faith is now moved from believing in Christmas to believing that Christmas is a pagan holiday. And both, what I'm going to suggest is that both ideas are a danger and a pitfall and have nothing to do with the message of either the Old or New Testaments. And it's a distraction that leads you down a rabbit trail from which there is no return. And but anyway, we'll look at briefly. Paul Ernst Jablonski, who lived back in the early 1700s, wrote a book concerning the origins of Christmas, and he puts forth in that book that a lot of the origins of what we knew as Christmas. Now, him writing about Christmas in the 1700s, Christmas was looked at much differently than what we see today. Much of what we see today as Christmas is the product of commercial advertising. The whole Santa, there was a character that we can call Santa Claus in different folklore, different countries, but our image of Santa today is really a product of commercials and commercializing Christmas to get people to buy more stuff and to give all these gifts and everything. But you will find bits and pieces of what you see as the Christmas holiday in ancient folklore. And of course, Jablonski goes back and says that it's part of the Mithra legends that the Romans incorporated into their own system. And the Romans were big. All the Roman gods were just Greek gods before they became Roman gods. And the reality is that most of the Romans didn't look at these creatures, these gods, as real gods. They were symbols of certain characteristics and personalities, and they used them in their temples. But their temples all had actual practical functions. They were mostly government buildings by the time of Christ, supported by taxation and providing services. And one of the reasons I'm touching on this is right now the United States government is supposedly in a shutdown. I was talking to federal employees just the other day who are shut down, and people are worried about, can we pay our bills because the government is shut down? And we're going to tie all these different ideas together so that you can get a little bit clearer perspective of what the early church was doing, what Abraham was doing, what Moses was doing, and what they all have in common. And so to understand that, we'll take a look when we be right back.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188. 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on satellite, internet, or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
So welcome back to Keys of the Kingdom. So how does this all fit together, and where are we going with all this, and is Christmas really a pagan holiday? Christmas as it's practiced most of the time today, probably throughout the world. You know, I'm familiar with some countries and what they do there. There's a lot of symbols we see, you know, Santa and elves and Christmas trees and lights on Christmas trees and decorating those trees and all these things. This is all just the superficial dressings that we put into what we call a holiday. Now, a lot of people, you know, Christmas happens to be a time when there's a lot more suicides, a lot more depression. Why would that be? It's supposed to be the, you know, season of joy and camaraderie and friendship. And the reality is, most of the people who celebrate Christmas, I don't know about most, but a lot of the people who celebrate Christmas, at least they have the intention of coming together with family and friends and peace on earth, goodwill towards men. All that's good. That's fine. And if they want to dress up like elves and wear Santa suits and stuff like that, you know, they can do that if they want. That, I don't think that has anything to do with the real interest there. And then what does all that have to do with the government shutdown? And which is taking place over Christmas, probably going to take place over the New Year's. You know, already we see Schumer backtracking that he says, well, that Pelosi is the one who's standing their ground. Of course, Pelosi's in Hawaii celebrating Christmas and doing whatever Pelosi does in Hawaii on Christmas. But what's really going on? What we want to do is develop a perspective of reality and move away from all the delusion and false rhetoric. So you have this guy in the valley north of us who's saying you're going to hell if you celebrate Christmas, and somebody else is poking him and antagonizing him. He actually was using two different Facebook accounts. One was on his side and agreeing, and the other one was disagreeing and arguing against him, and eventually the whole thing just disappeared. Somebody took it down. I wasn't following it. Somebody else was and giving me updates. But there's so much misinformation about all this. And when Paul Ernst Jablonski wrote his concerning the origin of Christmas, which actually was, I think, written in Latin, not originally in English, but that's the way publications sometimes were way back then, and then somebody would have to translate it. But someone writing about that now said he gave absolutely no facts in his claims, unsupported by any historical evidence. Well, that's not entirely true. And, of course, people could say that in an article, but then they didn't go back and actually read it. They can't read Latin, and so they have to read it in a translation. But it was not written as you would write a peer-reviewed paper today. He was making claims, and the fact that he himself was educated, could write in Latin or English or any other language, that he was an authority and he was making these suggestions. Well, almost immediately there was another book that came out, written by Ernst Friedrich Wernsdorf, and it was in the same period. It was a little bit later, and it was the origins of Christmas and the festival of the birth of the unconquerable Sun, S-U-N, Sun. And he put in more facts and was also kind of attacking Christianity, or at least Catholicism, in this. But he was saying certain things about the pagan, supposedly, putting this word pagan in here, and we'll explain why. Pagan origins of Christmas, or of even just Christianity. And this article refutes that, saying so much so that they were willing to, that Christians were so much against anything pagan that they were willing to be slaughtered in the arena rather than agree to anything the pagans wanted them to do to fit into being Greek, or what we might see as Hellenistic. But the reality is that's the guy who wrote that doesn't understand what the real Christian conflict was. He doesn't understand what a pagan was. And somebody wrote, like I said, on the New York group and asked, what's a pagan? What did it originally mean? Well, a pagan actually means someone from a small village. That's all it meant at that time. Yet at the time of Christ, the word pagan just meant somebody from a small village. Now, it did develop sort of a connotation. The more the city of Rome grew into this magnificent city and people became supposedly educated and everything else, they began to look down on somebody from a small village as kind of a hick. They're from a small village. They're naive. They're not sophisticated like we are from the big city. And, of course, we have the same terms today. Someone might say, you're a redneck. The word pagan could literally be translated redneck, depending on who's doing the translating. From my community, if somebody calls you a redneck, that's actually a compliment. That's not a bad thing. But if you're from the city, a redneck is somebody who is, shallow and country bumpkin. There's another phrase that we throw out, and so that's kind of what pagan would mean, depending on who's using it. That's what it meant. You're from some small town. You have a small town mentality. You're not sophisticated like the rest of us. So there was no pagan religion. As a matter of fact, you didn't even have to be religious to be considered pagan. You're just from a small village. That's all. That's all it meant. But like I said, over a period of time, then it became, like redneck. Of course, we have the comedian out there that, if you mow your lawn and find a car, you're probably a redneck, and that comes from, other comedian type deals that, here's your sign kind of approach to things, showing that people are not very bright. But, so yeah, it got that connotation, but originally it was just that you were from a small village. There were other books written in that same century. Edward Gibbons, now that's a much more sophisticated book. He doesn't necessarily have a lot of peer-review paper type of information, but he does have a lot of information because his Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire was not just a book, but a series of books, a whole collection of books. And it was one of the probably more read historical documents or history books at that time. It was very popular because it came out about 1776. And, of course, there had been lots of other people writing about some of the same topics because it was becoming a hot topic. How were governments formed? What's a part of our history? What's the evolution of government? And so, that came out during the American Revolution. Now, most people don't know this. Maybe a lot of our listeners do, but Christmas, it was actually illegal in many of the colonies to even celebrate Christmas. If you were caught celebrating Christmas in any way, shape, or form, you could actually be fined. and because it was illegal to even celebrate Christmas, because there was a kind of a backlash against Christianity at all. There was also another guy who wrote a little bit later in the 1800s, Alexander Hislop, and or Hyssop, depending on how you want to pronounce it, and he's known for a lot of other things, but he was kind of looking at Constantine as a villain, and villainizing Constantine and suggesting that the Roman Catholic Church was originated by Constantine, not by Christ. And there's a lot of evidence to that out there in historical documents that they are. But again, what we ultimately want to look at is the principles of Christ, the actual precepts, not the metaphors. And because, like, if we've done this many times, we go back to the Old Testament and you look at cast your bread upon the waters. That's not describing a religious ceremony where you go down to the lake and cast bread upon the waters. It's a metaphor. And many of the other things that we've turned into actual ritual practices, or at least the Jews did, as they fell away from the principles of Abraham and Moses, they began to practice these metaphors as if they were religious ceremonies. And we talk about religious ceremonies and religious rites. They have to be rooted in the actual principles of virtue and loving your neighbor, actually practical ways of doing these things. And when Constantine first began to formulate his version of Christianity with the help of people like Ambrose and even Jerome and others, they understood to probably a greater degree what Christianity was, the fundamental essences of Christianity, some of the fundamental, not all of them, some of the fundamental essences of Christianity better than many of the modern Christians do today. Although many of the modern Christians do good things like Christ said to do, what Constantine knew is that the temples of Rome had to be supported mostly, or at least more so, by the contribution, the free will contributions of the people. And this was a step back towards the way Jerusalem was operating before Herod the Great. Because Herod the Great said, well, we're going to support our religious faith through a system of Corban, that where you sign up and you had to pay in. And then then your obligations to your community, to your parents, you could say, well, I have fulfilled that because I have paid into the temple. And so now you can go to the temple and get what you want, what you need back, because I've already given to the temple. And so that's what should be supporting you. People will not understand that, but that's how we're going to tie all this together. But anyway, there's a couple other guys that were written about, because remember, this is 7. There was a contemporary, Charles William King, back 1880s. He was around 1850s, and he published his influential The Gnostic and Their Remains. And he published that, I think, around 1860 or 1864. Yeah, he's also referring to this Mithraism and that influence that was carrying over. And it really doesn't matter, all these things. It's just a matter of historic. There were other guys like Gerald Massey and Wallace Budge, and they all wrote about these things. Some of their books were better written than others. Some of them brought in a lot of ideas that, everything from mistletoe to what have you, that they equated back to ancient practices. And some of their writing is probably fairly accurate, and some of it is actually kind of a stretch, trying to make their point and make their book popular. Everybody wanted to come up with something new to tie back to those ancient myths. And then those people who were leaning in that direction of belief and were wanting to outlaw Christmas and things like that, they would buy those books looking for more evidence to justify their position. But I'm actually saying the real Christian position should be completely outside of all that conflict. That isn't, I don't care whether you celebrate Christmas or you don't celebrate Christmas. I don't care whether you put up a tree or don't put up a tree. Now, to be honest, and this is one of the quotes from the Bible that people like to bring up, that which you go back to Jeremiah 10, and this, a lot of people are surprised that this is in there, and it depends on, the translation is not perfect here either, but it's accurate enough where you can get the picture. It says, "Hear ye the words of the Lord, speaketh unto you, O house of Israel, saith the Lord, learn not the ways of the heathen." And now we have this word heathen there. What word is that? Is that like pagan? Can we just plug in the word pagan there? Well, I'm not going to even tell you. I'm not going to go into that. It says, "Be not dismayed at the signs of the heaven, or for the heathen are dismayed at them." So he's talking about what's the signs of the heaven? Well, I'm not going to tell you. For the customs of the people are vain. Now he's talking about customs. These are those rites and ceremonies of the people are in vain, are vain. It doesn't actually say in vain. He says vain. And actually the word "are" isn't even in the original text, but the people vain. So the customs, people, vain, that's all there in the sentence. "For one cutteth a tree out in the forest, the work of his hands, and the workman with the axe. They deck it with silver and gold, they fasten it with nails and with hammers, that it move not." So they cut down a tree, they fasten it with nails and hammers, and they make it stand upright. It goes on to say in verse 5, "They are upright as palm trees, but speak not." So this is a metaphor of something other than your Christmas tree. But this is one of the verses that they say, you're not supposed to be doing this, cutting this tree in the forest and bringing it inside and setting it up so it stands upright because you fastened it with nails, and you decorate it with silver and gold. And it goes on to say they must needs be born because they cannot go. "Be not afraid of them, for they cannot do evil, neither also is it in them to do good." So this quote is one of the quotes that people bring up to say you should not be celebrating Christmas and setting up Christmas trees. It has nothing to do with trees, any more than going down to the lake and casting your bread upon the waters. It has to do with going down to the lake and throwing tortillas out there on the lake. That is not what the verse is about. These are metaphors telling you about something else, that you decorate with silver and gold. It actually doesn't say decorate. The word there is they deck it with silver and gold. So what do they mean? They deck it with silver and gold. I was going to look up the word deck there and see what the word there is yafa, the Hebrew word, which is said to mean, it's translated fair 4 times, beautiful twice, deck it only once. It's supposed to mean to be bright, to be beautiful, to be handsome, to be fair. So they make it what it is with silver and gold. They give it silver and gold. And they make it stand upright, but it can't do good or evil. They bring it into their house, and they're taking this tree. Now, you have to remember that the word tree shows up hundreds of times in the Bible. And they're talking about this tree coming from the wilderness, from somewhere else. And they set it up with the works of their hands so that it stands upright. This has to do with the men you elect and put into power. It doesn't have to do with Christmas trees. and because with the works of your hands, you're allowing these things to be to stand up upright. And again, you have to understand the metaphor. I mean, the same word that you see there translated axe, it's not the only word in the Hebrew for axe. It can mean axe, but it's actually only translated axe once. It's also translated tongs, like something you grab and you and you hold on to, and you can grasp with your tongs. So the same word for axe is the same word for tongs? No. They're trying to express ideas. It's an unused root word that actually begins with the mem and has to do with righteousness. It has several letters in it that have to do with righteousness, and mem has to do with flow. And so anyway, and even the word workman, if you go and look at the word workman in the Hebrew. But now they translate, but these people are speaking in metaphors. And that word workman, it's more often translated carpenter. It doesn't really mean carpenter. It means craftsman, artisan, somebody who creates something. Well, what did you create? You created a government, and you brought these men into your house, and you made them stand upright, and you gave them your silver and gold. And now they rule over you. They aren't really doing evil. You have empowered them to do evil. You will pay the price of their sins, because they are just your political puppets. You've created them. And that's really what it's about. It's not about Christmas trees. And so this whole conflict about, should you celebrate Christmas, not celebrate Christmas, and people, I haven't celebrated Christmas since I was 9 years old. But I celebrate it the way everybody else celebrates it. I was the bah humbug kid. I was happy, I was smiley, and to tell you the truth, until I was about 9 years old, or 10 years old, I got sick every Christmas. Every Christmas I would be sick for the whole Christmas holidays. It was horrible. I hardly got out of my pajamas during the Christmas holidays. I'd come home from school, and I couldn't breathe, and I couldn't understand what it was. But one day I was sitting there watching everybody Christmas shop, and I saw the greed in people. I saw into the other realm of their own hearts. And not that everybody at Christmas, but you all know, you go to the Christmas stores and everybody's running around. I know people who go into debt that they don't pay off until December of the next year to buy gifts for everybody because they're so addicted. It's like an emotional high, hearing the music, seeing the decoration. They got to go back to that. And in itself, it can do no evil, but it can also do no good. But the same when you create your governments. The governments don't really do what they will do bad things, but they are really just a product of the power that you've given them. It's like Saul. Saul was a great guy. You gave him power, and it corrupted him. You corrupt the governments with the power that you give them. Why do you give them power? Because you're slothful, because you're lazy. You're not doing it yourself. So now during this government shutdown, people are saying, they were going to set up barricades so nobody could go to the tomb of the unknown soldier. This is what last time they shut down the government. This is one of the stories that came out. And I thought you could call up the VFW and say, hey, we'd like you. We're not going to hire guys to put up barriers. We're going to let people go there. We'd like to have somebody keeping an eye on things. So can you have one of your VFW guys in there 24/7? They would line up. They'd be down there in full uniform, and they would do it for free. And you could keep all those things open. And people all talk about, poor federal workers may not be able to pay their bills, and they may pay their rent because the government shut down. Every time there's a government shutdown, when the government starts up again, they get all their back pay, even though they didn't go to work. So they're all really gonna get an extra vacation. They're just gonna get their check a little bit late. And so anyway, it's not that big a deal. What the big deal is that you're going to be creating your debt ceiling. In other words, you're going to give them more silver and gold. And you would be giving them silver and gold if you had any silver and gold, but you've already given all the silver and gold away. You don't have that anymore. And hopefully we'll get into some of that and explain to you, show you how all that's taken place. So what are you giving them? And this is another one of the things that they always talk about in the Christmas holidays is they come from the ancient Druid holidays, and they were actually sacrificing children and all these kinds of things. Well, that's actually what you're going to give them, because the debt ceiling, as you increase that, who has to pay that off? It will be your children. You're cursing your children with more and more debt. And it has nothing, this whole distraction about celebrating Christmas or not celebrating Christmas really is a distraction. It really doesn't matter. I'm absolutely content with people gathering together at Christmas and meeting with a family and all this stuff and getting together and maybe even going out and helping people. Unfortunately, like a lot of people will do around Thanksgiving is they'll make up food baskets and they'll go around and give to the poor and everything. But there's no discretionary giving. There's no wise giving. And the fact is people have to eat 364 days. They actually don't have to eat 364 days, but they have to eat 52 weeks out of the year, let's put it that way. And so because you gave something during Christmas week or Thanksgiving week, what about the rest of the year? It's a nice gesture, but Christianity was far more practical, which is why Christ commanded that people sit down in the tens, hundreds, and thousands so that they could take care of one another. And that's where the persecution, the pagan persecution, comes into play. But if you come back, we're going to tell you what a real pagan is and what a real Christian is and how you can move in the direction of the kingdom of God and his righteousness.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.